My name is Amiel. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law for 26 years.
My name is Darlene. I work at Wasabi Black Slaughter. I've been here for 13 years as the front desk administrator receptionist.
Hi, I'm Carole Albright. I'm an associate attorney at Wasabi Black Slaughter, and I've been here for about 7 years and have practiced for about 17.
Okay. And how has African American history affected you?
Well, African American history has affected me in lots of ways, including the fact that African American history is not necessarily what is taught in schools and is not necessarily what is publicized. So, it's affected me in that it's history. And so to call it African American history as opposed to just history is, frankly, in my opinion, one of the effects. It's the history of our world and the history of our United States. So I'd start with that. I'd start with it's not a separate history as far as I'm concerned, because Americans and others have all interacted against and upon each other. Now, the challenges faced by blacks versus whites and versus others, those are obviously different, and those are obviously of significant impact, but I'll deal with that in my second question.
It has had an impact on me in various ways, basically because I grew up during the 60s and 70s, and I was able to do a lot of interacting with people like before. I didn't know any difference. I think, and that's sad, because the way we're introduced to being different, it just comes negative, and it shouldn't be negative. We're just different just because of who we are. And because of having to go through, I guess, the integration period, it stagnated me in some ways, but then other ways, because of some of the things that was happening within my own community, made me stand up and be a stronger person. So it's been both negative and positive.
I grew up just post 60s, 70s, and so integration was already well taking place, and a good part of my growing up, my youth, was in a town that my school was about 50% African American and 50% white. So to me, I didn't really know there were these issues until I got older. Where I learned it, like Amiel referred to, was more in the history books. And nobody really spent a lot of time emphasizing how we got to where we are. I don't know that I'd really known that there was all this history there. But so I think a big way of how the racial diversity and the challenges that African Americans went through to get the rights that I just assumed we all had was through learning it through books. And some of that I do think comes across as a negative. Now, with that said, there was a lot of suffering that African Americans went through to get to the point that they had those rights. Unfortunately, I think in educating us about the history, which I think you have to appreciate all different kinds of history. It's what makes America what it is. So there's lots of suffering that created the country. But in learning about that, I think sometimes there's a negative spin that creates a diversity because of it was really a right versus wrong, it was a black versus white, when there were so many other things going on at the same time. So I think that was kind of my educational part. But growing up, I had friends of both races, and my school was very exclusively white and black. I did not have what most of the schools have now, or much more internationally diverse. And there's all different parts of the world, Middle East, Far East. Mine was very much African American and white. So those were my friends, those were my neighbors, we lived next door, mixed in. I played sports with both races equally and got to appreciate the differences, but the similarities in just other children. I think I'm more aware of the prejudices maybe that different races go through now as an older person than I was growing up.
The second question, Amiel, was, have you ever had to represent an African American in regards to being dealing with racism or prejudices or anything that you thought was unfair, unequal to him or her?
For the last, I guess, 23 years that I've been practicing in North Carolina, I have had a case ongoing, or more than one case, relating to discrimination based upon race. It's a constant. It has, in many ways, gotten better. I'm not sure if people's attitudes have changed. I mean, truly, you have to deal with. It appears that when you speak with younger people, they have a better understanding and a better ability of dealing with diversity in races, similarities and differences than it appears people of the older generations. But to answer the question, yes, I have. It's ongoing. I have a case ongoing right now. That's a public case that it's been involved in Greensboro for many years. And the bottom line is that we've seen pretty clearly that the group in power, and for lack of better words, it tends to be white males, have had the ability and the control to impact not only blacks, but females, Latinos, and other races. And they have discriminated against them in employment relationships, housing situations, and other public accommodations. So that exists. It's a passion of mine. It hopefully is something that we won't have to deal with years from now, whether it's 2, 3, 10, 20, 50. But yes, it continues, and it continues to be a problem.
Ms. Carole, the police captain in Florida, Ron King, was fired less than 2 weeks ago due to having shooting targets of the picture of Trayvon Martin posted for fellow officers trained, and his excuse was he was pretty much trying to show officers what not to shoot at. He was fired. Do you think that was more than enough, or do you think more justice should be served?
I think it just goes to show that people sometimes just don't think. It was one of the biggest things. It's just ridiculous that anybody would think that was funny, that it was educational, that it was motivating. I really don't know what he was thinking. So, but I think it kind of emphasizes what we've sort of been saying, is that unfortunately there are groups that take advantage of situations to bolster their egos, to bolster their political positions, whatever it may be. And in this case, I think it was probably just an ego trip, or he thought it was funny. One or the other. It doesn't really matter. Completely inappropriate. He was obviously in a position of power, and who knows who he was influencing, but I'm sure he sent the wrong message to young officers of all different races, and send the message that if you are in a position like this, you can take any situation and make it reflect what you want it to reflect. And he was making a joke out of it, and it's totally inappropriate. So, do I think the punishment was great? Yes, I think he should have been fired. Absolutely, I think that was the right way to go. Is there anything more you can do? I don't see that I think that's enough from a punishment standpoint. I think before he should be allowed to come back into a public assistance type position where he's working with the public. Maybe they require some sort of sensitivity training. I don't really like that term, but something that reflects that he understands what he did and that it was inappropriate. I don't know that that's necessary, maybe, but I think firing is really the only thing. I think that was the right position to take, but I also don't think it needs to go into further litigation. It shouldn't be a civil lawsuit. I think our country goes way too far with those things. I mean, he did the wrong thing. They took the right, I thought, quick, appropriate action when he was using the position he was to make fun of a situation that wasn't funny at all. So,
you haven't asked this, but I'm going to add briefly. I don't comment. I don't know anything about anything that I don't hear and see the evidence about. And what I would suggest is, before anybody makes a judgment about anything, even if it appears on its face to either be the most racist act on earth or not, people should not be commenting on it negatively or positively unless they know the facts. Carole read about it. I don't know anything about it, and so I would tell you that it's possible that he is the most racist person on earth. It's also possible that if you asked people within his employment, blacks, whites, Latinos, that they might say that he is the best police chief that ever was. If that's the case, and it was, as Carole says, a stupid thing and an inappropriate thing to say, then I think, just as Carole says, we need a little bit fewer knee-jerk, rash reactions in our society. And I know it may be a cop-out, but unless you personally deal with something, or unless you're on the jury, or you're the lawyer, you don't know everything that was said, and you don't know everything that was done, and you don't know everything about the people. So I would add to what Carole said and say, before we react to things, we should know more.
Thank you all very much. That will conclude this interview. Thanks a lot.